Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Tom Keene, along with Paul Sweeney. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. Let's drag ourselves back to the Fed right now. Julia Coronado is perfect to do that, president of Macropolicy Perspectives, major duty at BNP Paribas in the trenches of the financial crisis as well. Julia, I've gotten off the beat. Does the economic data this week game change a data-dependent Fed?
Probably game change is too strong because they're meeting next week and we already know that they're not going to do anything. But they are going to give us some guidance. They are going to give us a new forecast and we'll get a press conference. And so it might help set the tone as to, when we heard from Chair Powell last week, he said, they just need a little bit more, just a little bit more progress to confirm they're on the right track and build their confidence before cutting rates. Right. That doesn't sound like a very high bar, but if we get a setback in inflation, he might sound a little, more on the stern side versus on the hopeful side. And now your inflation report for the day, in that I follow carefully the lodestone of my house, which is the price of dog food. What it costs to do vet bill and kennel fee up with a proper fancy Upper East Side dog food has gone from $28 to $44 over a good 5-6 pandemic years as well. Julia Coronado, an update from Dr. Coronado on the CPI. Look, we have made a lot of progress, but in the first quarter of the year, we often get some firmer prints. We saw that in January. We are going to see probably a little bit more of that tomorrow in the February report. We're looking for a 0.3 on core. That would still bring the annual rate down a couple ticks, but it would lead the 3-month annualized rate up. So it would be kind of neither here nor there, I think, in terms of the Fed. It would not be particularly worrisome because, year on year, we're still making progress, but it would also say there's no rush. And then you take that with the Friday employment report, I think that's going to matter more, Tom, the jobs data, if that shows signs of, the perfect Goldilocks labor conditions are starting to cool off a little bit, that might give the Fed more urgency versus if that continues. And I would say Friday's employment report, it was a mixed bag. The jobs number was strong, lots of downward revisions, and a pretty notable uptick in the unemployment rate. So, I think they're kind of in, we're getting closer to where those risks are getting balanced. And we'll talk about this on my podcast out now, Single Best Idea. Look for that later this afternoon. I'm going to talk to Dr. Coronado about annualized, 3-month annualized, 12-month annualized, 6-month annualized. This I know is foreign to you, Damien, but annualized is a very annualized thing.
Well, here for
Save
me,
the show, Damien.
I mean, for me, it's not just about inflation in the U.S. It's about inflation abroad. I mean, this week we also see Brazil, Germany, India. I think at the end of the week we see France, Italy, Poland. I mean, Julia, talk to us a little bit about inflation dynamics outside of the United States.
Well, that's an excellent point. I mean, we have seen progress globally, and it's sort of widely thought that China is now a disinflationary force, given how lackluster their growth is and how much capacity they have. So globally, we are actually in a much better place than we were this time last year. Right, and it is across regions. So again, we're not back down to pre-pandemic, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. And most central banks, not just the Fed, with the exception of the BOJ, of course, always the outlier, but most central banks are considering moving off a very high spot rate so that, in acknowledgement of some of this progress.
Well, Julia, we also see inflation data out of Sweden on Wednesday. And as we know, the Riksbank might be the very first developed market central bank to move. I think the market's pricing in something like a 60% probability of a move by May. Forget about inflation, though. I mean, you mentioned Japan. I want to talk about Japan and what we're seeing in Japan ahead of this March 19th meeting. What do you expect there?
Well, look, Japan has been both kind of gradually pivoting away from its ultra easy stance, but very, very patient in doing so.
The G word.
Yeah. So will we actually see a move? I am not the Bank of Japan expert. I think it's, they're going to keep evolving and rotating. Whether this is the meeting, I'm certainly less confident to put a stake in the ground on that.
Right. Julia, to get back to the data this week in retail sales, the consumer 68, 69, 70, 78% in my household of GDP is well. Tie in your GDP call right now with the actual retail sales statistics 3-month annualized that we've been seeing. The consumer is buoyant. Am I right?
Well, we saw some retrenchment in the January retail sales. Remember, we saw a decline in core retail sales. I would say consumers have really kind of gone back to their pre-pandemic norms in the sense that they're spending. They've got jobs, they've got income, and they're spending. But what we hear, what we see in the inflation data, what we hear anecdotally, the Fed's beige book certainly shows that, is that consumers are price sensitive again.
Okay.
They want a deal, Tom. They want a deal.
Okay, Julia, I'm running out of time. I don't mean to be rude, but the answer is it's Rude Monday. And the answer, Dr. Coronado, is you're coming in with like a 2% real GDP and you pop on disinflation, and all of a sudden, are you modeling out a subpar nominal GDP?
Actually, we're kind of optimistic on the productivity side of things. So we actually do think that this productivity rebound is not just a one-off, that it's a better trend this cycle. So we've got GDP running around 2% with a Fed funds rate at 5.5%. That's not too bad.
Right.
And it's also, the beauty of it is that it's non-inflationary. So this is solid growth that isn't necessarily inflationary. That brings nominal GDP slowly, gradually back down to the 4.5%, 5% zone, the sweet spot where the Fed wants to see it. I think that's where we're heading in the first half of this year.
I was watching the Oscars last night, Julia, and the answer is nobody's on speaking terms. Are you and Constance Hunter on speaking terms? Is it working out at Macropolicy
Constance Hunter and I speak all the time.
Really?
We text. We speak, we Zoom, we do it all, Tom, all the forms.
Very good. I saw Constance Hunter with the Council on Foreign Relations the other day. Good to see Macropolicy Perspectives out on the streets of New York. Julia Coronado there. Right now, and this is great, it's sort of like the week after the employment, it's a little less, there's some economic data this week,
just
but it's time to just like reassess the markets. We did that with Brian Nick, with Francois Trahan, and now joining us, Michael Purves of Tallbacken as well. Damien's got, folks, you got to see this in the studio. You really can't see this on YouTube, but it's like Bloomberg Business of Sports. You're worse than Scarlet Food.
I keep a lot of notes.
You bring in like 30 pages of notes.
I do, and I highlight everything. I'm a very big yellow highlight.
The only note I have is my coffee and donut message. There we go. Lisa, thank you.
I mean, look, I like to teach.
It's like Lisa's taking a photo here for social of your. When are you doing this? During the weekend?
No, actually, I try to wake up early on a Monday morning and have a cup of coffee, come in early, and get ready for you,
You're
Tom.
bringing in Purves, but I'm talking to the architect from Columbia first. Michael Purves, how many people do we have that studied architecture in school? What in God's name did they do to Central Park South? They got Billionaires Row. Yeah. You got this gorgeous tapestry of Manhattan, like Paris.
Yes.
And instead, we put 6, 7, 8 tall, pointy skyscrapers so Ken Griffin can wave to me.
Yeah,
we destroyed the Manhattan skyline, right?
Do you remember when the AOL Time Warner building was being built? It was a huge controversy. Look at that building now compared to those, right?
The Matchstick building,
the Deutsche Bank building.
The Empire State Building is now looking cute, right?
In the Chrysler Building, they look in proportion. But to you, seriously, to you that have really studied the art of this, of architecture at Columbia, is the solution that we have to build 10 more of those tall, ginormous skyscrapers to balance it out?
Apparently someone in the city government decided it was. I guess it brings in a lot of money and it pays other bills, but...
I don't know. Damien lives in one of them.
No. I mean, look, we could talk about architecture all we want here, but for me, it's all about the architecture of financial markets. And within that architecture, Tom, is volatility, which is you like that one. So, I mean, look, for me, I look at volatility, but in all its forms, Michael, as you do, there's FX vol, which is really, really low. Yeah. And then you've got equity vol, and equity vol appears to be ticking up. And during the break, we were talking a little bit about some of these ETFs, these buy-right ETFs, these kind of vol-embedded ETFs. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what you're seeing there, the flows that have been, there have been a lot of flows going into that type of product. How do you think that's impacting market? Is that suppressing vol at current levels?
Well, I think it does until it doesn't, right? Just to zoom, step back for a second. If you look at the rate of cash equity volumes over the last 15, 20 years, it's been flat. If you look at the rate of option, at like just S&P options or all the options, it has been growing 8 or 9% every year, and then over the last couple of years, take that up to 25, 30%. Right. It has been just extreme, and when you have this huge rise of derivatives layered on top of very static cash volumes, you're going to get weird distortions to market structure. Yeah. There, and it was just when was it 4 years ago, 2018. Oh my God, 6 years ago. Jesus, time flies. Where you had the XIV, that short vol ETF. Famously implode, and the VIX, the short squeeze there, the short of the short, if you will, drove the VIX up to 46 in a heartbeat, right? Right. And I think with all these products, you have to be aware of them. Some of them are actually pretty. Don't have as much of an impact on market structure.
Can it happen again? We were talking about the dispersion trade. What would it take to get the VIX above 20?
Well, probably it starts the dispersion trade just, it's been working great for the last year and a half. It looks
and what is that for our audience?
Okay, yeah. So effectively, we're jargon-free, Dana.
Sorry,
Lisa, do you know what the dispersion trade is?
Well, basically, it's a trade that some option traders put on, where you're long a basket of single stock volatilities and you're hedging that against index volatility, right? And everything works great because over the last year, you think about it, you have a huge dispersion of returns, right? You had the Magnificent Seven doing 75%. You had the SPX equal weight up 14%. That's a recipe for one stock or one sector is going to do well.
I want to rip up the script here. I just put this out on YouTube on live chat because you're expert at this. Michael Purves on the market structure, the distortions of market structure. What is the market structure of Bitcoin?
I'm going
our audience knows my answer.
I think you just gave the audience your answer.
I was going to make a quip that if Bitcoin rallies to fresh time highs as it just doesn't make a sound today, whereas just a few years ago when it famously broke 20,000 and every institutional investor had to have a view on it.
Is it a market structure or is it contrived?
I think it's contrived, personally. I don't really wade too far into the debate, but I do think there's a religious element to it, whether it's kind of binary. I don't really write on Bitcoin other than pure technically. And look, the technicals have certainly looked better here. Whether it really, Tom, right now there's probably a whole bunch of biotech stocks out there that you've never heard of that have gone up 3x in the last 6 months or whatever. I do wonder whether Bitcoin as a mainstream asset class, that thesis is really behind us, right? So maybe it goes to 200,000, but does anyone really care?
Well, Michael, I'm an emerging market fixed income guy, so because I cover fixed income, I like to look at foreign exchange. So let's talk about FX vol, and for me, when I look at FX vol and I look out at tenors, called risk reversals that look at 6 months, 1 year. It's all about euro dollar. That's the center of gravity in the FX universe. But over the short term, it's been a lot about dollar yen. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are heading into this week, heading into next week with the BOJ. What's going on with dollar yen?
Yeah, look, I mean, the yen certainly has been one of the more interesting cases in the current, as you know, Damien, one of the more interesting FX pairs to be looking at. And I would also sort of note, if you looked at gold vols, finally started picking up with these things, and there is a correlation. You look at dollar yen, and you look at dollar gold, and those two tend to map together pretty well here. And I think certainly some of the gold bulls would argue that there really is a. It feels that look, you're not supposed to be with rate hikes still, rate cuts rather still to come, but not coming. That, oh my God, gold's playing great defense.
I'm going to go back to the
highs.
Purves expertise, which is market structure, which is gold is central bank buying versus retail's disinterest. That's sort of the zeitgeist out there. What's the market structure of the Magnificent Seven? Because they pulse on the Bloomberg. Folks, Damien's doing math. Purves is expert at this. Lisa and I are just looking at the blinky red-green, trying to figure out if there's more red than green. It's really scientific. Right. Okay, what's the market structure of NVIDIA or Apple, disappointing here? Are they working in a normative way?
Well, look, I mean, I think, broadly speaking, for the Magnificent, I don't know, what do you call it, 4 these days, right? Yeah. But basically, I think after 2 or 3 years of massive valuation volatility and sort of trying to settle into the, where are the long-run interest rates likely to be, I think that process is largely behind us. So what I'm saying, Tom, is that you kind of follow the earnings growth. If the earnings growth is there, in a cyclical stock, it's going to do well. If the earnings growth is better and it continues to be outstanding in NVIDIA, NVIDIA will get bid. 20 seconds. The Purves SPX target here with this great one. You nailed it on that. Yeah. Well, look. I officially from December I'm at 4,900. I think 5,500 or even higher. I even think that if the earnings hold up, you could even at some point this year touch 6K. You won't stay there, but I think you could touch it. So there we go. Do we get that on tape, Rich? Do we get that on tape? Purves with the Yardeni 6,000. Michael, that was great. On international relations, and we've been honored to have Angela Stent on with us recently on Mr. Putin, it pays to go with people that have decades of experience. Ariel Cohen is at the Atlantic Council and very quietly has put together a resume that is extraordinary. You can go back to his book, Russian Imperialism, Development in Crisis, from just a few years ago to really get a foundation of his work on what we observe out of Moscow. Ariel Cohen, as simply as I can, what is the imperialism, the Russian imperialism of Vladimir Putin?
Well, good morning, first of all. I'm a great fan, as you know. Russian imperialism didn't start with Vladimir Putin. Russian imperialism started in the 15th century when the Russians finally shook off the domination of the heirs or the grandchildren of Genghis Khan. They were occupied for over 280 years by the Mongols. They were, pretty good subjects. They paid their taxes in pelts, in furs of animals. They gave their wives and daughters to the occupiers, and it went. The princes intermarried. So there was sort of a commingling of the Mongols, and later known as the Tatars, with the Russians. And then finally they shook them off. The Mongol Empire fell apart. And one thing they got from their occupiers is how to run a centralized state. And a lot of elements that the Mongols took from the Chinese were now in the administrative government DNA of the Russians, and they never stopped since. So for many, many years, for centuries, they would expand and expand. They captured the peoples of the Volga Basin, of the Urals, Siberia, and they built the largest country on earth. And now Putin decided to put it together after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Okay, let's, Damien, jump in here, please.
Well, I just wanted to know, I mean, like, we're talking Russia here, but, what's interesting is we have an election in Russia that's coming up this week, right? And we have some interesting happenings specifically regarding Navalny's constituency and his wife and the role she's playing and how I believe they're trying to get people to show up for the election at certain points in time. I wonder if you can just give us a little bit of color about what's going on the ground within Russia.
First of all, Russia had two very brief periods of voting and democracy, and after that they reverted to this Tsarist pattern, whether it was a Red Tsar, the general secretary like Lenin, Stalin, you probably remember Brezhnev, the guy with the eyebrows. And then, so the democracy, after the Tsarist regime collapsed, the Emperor Nicholas II eventually was executed with his family. That lasted all 8 or 9 months, 9 months. Under Yeltsin, Putin's predecessor who appointed Putin wasn't really elected by popular will. He was first appointed as a heir apparent, and then they organized the elections.
Yeah, but
so under Putin, he dismantled.
Dr. Cohen, just because of time, we got to get this in. I think it's really important. What is the size or impact of the Navalny constituency within Russia? On a percentage basis, how big are they?
Oh, gosh. Nobody knows, first. Okay. Second, it's small. Third, sometimes miraculously, these events and these people have oversized influence. So I do believe that both my good friend Boris Nemtsov, who was murdered in 2015, and Alexei Navalny, who was murdered just now, will have an outsized influence on the Russian people and the Russian history. And 100 years from now, people will remember their names, probably will teach these names at school.
Get on that.
What's happening now is a sham. It's sham elections. It's just going through the motions to justify reappointment.
I got to squeeze in this one last question, Dr. Cohen, and it's simple. You get out a map, you get in a car in St. Petersburg, you go west, Helsinki's a cup of coffee away, and Stockholm's 3 cups of coffee away. What is the importance to Putin that Sweden and Finland have joined NATO?
It is a geopolitical failure of Putin, just as the war in Ukraine is. Putin was fat and happy selling $50 billion of natural gas, billions of oil, lumber, timber, the usual stuff, the raw materials Russia always sold for centuries. And now he lost his markets. All this blah, blah about how they're going to be a part of the global South, part of what? Greater China. It is propaganda for the Russian people. In reality, Putin created the hugest self-inflicted wound for the Russian international standing.
Got to leave it there. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much. Ariel Cohen, thought-provoking in Russia with the Putin election coming up. Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and the headlines, the newspaper report. Of course, last night, the emotion of the Oscars, there were some high points for me and some things where I'm like, really, I'm a huge Jimmy Kimmel fan, so I thought he nailed it out of the park. But let's be honest, for Lisa Mateo, the apex of the Oscars was 8:22 p.m.
El arte del cine es un lenguaje universal que habla a los hilos que nos unen juntos.
Beautifully said. You see, he's not such a bad bunny. Happy birthday, brother.
Gracias. Thank you.
International films enrich our cultural understanding by broadening our perspectives of the world and each other. Here are the nominees for International Feature Film.
The Rock. And then it was downhill from there. He got Best Tuxedo, by the way. Lisa Mateo, weigh in here now. The Rock made an early appearance, and I thought that was...
University of Miami grad.
Ooh. That's right, football. Yeah, played football.
Did you tune in last night? Or were you
I was
in
sleeping by like 7:30. It was still light out. That was a problem with this daylight saving thing.
I
I'm
totally
trying to get
agree.
to sleep
Totally
and it's still
agree.
daylight. But I missed that one. But I heard about it, so I went to go watch the replay.
You went back and watched it
I went to
6 or 7 times.
Yes, I have to do that. And I also saw a naked John Cena. That kind of came out.
He's been a fan.
Well, too.
Actually, I got a note from him years ago. He's been a fan of the show.
Really?
I think he was dressed when he wrote the note.
Hopefully, well, maybe not. Hopefully.
Some people here thought it didn't really work. Did you think?
Well, I don't keep score, but for me, if I guess was keeping score, I only saw that Netflix won 1 award and Apple got shut out. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
My God, that's
Comcast.
not good.
Congratulations to Universal, Mr. Roberts and the Comcast crew for having a heck of a night. Let's get to it. The newspapers. Lisa, what do you have?
All right, so we're starting with surge pricing coming to more restaurant menus. All right, so we have these technology providers. They're pitching these services, allow restaurants to change their prices weekly, monthly, depending on demand. Remember Wendy's got in trouble, that customers had this outcry against it because they were talking about maybe doing something like this. But these technology companies, they're putting out the software. Some companies are starting to see actually profits from this. The Wall Street Journal, Cali Barbecue, they boosted its monthly delivery sales by $1,500 by doing that, by adding this surge pricing. Dave & Buster's are doing it. Some people aren't.
What took so
Applebee's,
long?
IHOP, they're not doing it though.
Waiting a little bit longer to get your pulled pork sandwich. That's got to be healthy.
Doug
Let it sit out there in the sun for a little while.
Doug Cass had brunch at the Breakers this weekend in Florida. He rang up, it was like $700 for 2 people. Like, you know what a Bloody Mary at the Breakers cost? $40.
There you go. $40.
Next.
Right. Brooklyn making history. Yes, they have the first all-electric residential building in New York City. So that means no gas stoves. The heating, hot water, that's going to be electric too. It's 44 stories, 440 units. It has a rooftop pool. It has a terrace. It has a gym.
All electric.
Retail stores. Well, the apartments, all electric.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to know how much it's going to cost? A studio, $3,500 a month.
Oof.
We have a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom going for about $8,000 a month.
That's rich.
And a 3-bedroom, $11,200 a month.
Yeah.
There you go.
Welcome to New York. Welcome to,
To Brooklyn.
30 seconds here right now. Gas stove or electric? You take my gas stove away.
Yeah,
I get upset.
My mother I was just going to say that. My mom has an electric stove. She's leasing a place down in Florida right now, and she cannot cook on it. She hates it. It's electric.
Yeah.
She's out.
Then there's new ones, I guess. I don't know.
Have to agree.
Wicked old school.
No, of course.
I know it's a hot thing. You got what? You got one more, 2 more. Squeeze 2 more in.
Okay, here we go. NBA looking to expand their Europe options. Damon, you probably know more about this than me, but these are ongoing discussions between the NBA, you have the International Basketball Federation, the Euro League. They're trying to figure out how to grow basketball over in Europe, right? So they've been talking about this, but for the first time, the NBA actually considering options that could exclude the Euro League. So Sportico is saying that could include a new standalone NBA Europe League. I guess
Damien, what do you
this
think?
more talent over in Europe, is that the...
I guess so. I mean, look, they are looking for more talent. And certainly, if you look at the recent drafts, I mean, all
Right.
of the top players are coming from Europe. But I think it's more about trying to expand awareness, not necessarily in Europe, but in Africa as well, in the Middle East, and some of these other hard-to-reach places. And I think that might be the basis for this
You
potential
got
deal.
you got one left, or is
Yeah.
that it for Monday?
No, it was Oscars. Oh, we forgot to talk about I Am Ken, or I'm Just Ken, the performance by Ryan Gosling at the Oscars.
Oh,
We didn't
how
get to
was
talk
that? I
about
didn't get to see that. I
Yes,
love
I
Ryan
saw
Gosling.
the replay of it. He had the pink cowboy hat, the whole pink rhinestone-studded outfit, but it was really good. Everybody was raving
see
about
Barbie,
it.
Tom? Have you
yeah,
seen
yeah,
Barbie?
because they weren't sure.
Yeah.
No, Tom hasn't seen Barbie yet.
Well, you know,
Tom
and Billie
hasn't seen any of
Eilish,
these.
you know, I mean, she did a Barbie song as well.
Yes, she did. She
Mateo,
went for
thank
it.
You going to go back now and watch The Rock for the 14th time?
I'm sorry.
He had a silver tuxedo. I thought it was a reach.
It was fan.
He's very handsome. I love him.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.